Up next on Inside the SCCA, presented by raceschool.com. Racing in the Big Easy. Welcome to episode 218, I believe, of Inside the SCCA. I'm Brian Bielanski, and this is Inside the SCCA, presented by raceschool.com. Our guest today to talk about New Orleans, Formula Vee, FE2, a whole bunch of other stuff, none other than the reigning 2024 SCCA Formula Vee National Champion, Steve Whitston. Good morning, Steve.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you on the show. It's that time of year where we're getting ready to go to the Big Easy, one of my absolute favorite. You live in a place that I think would be one of my favorite places in the world because it has three of my favorite things: barbecue, music, and a racetrack, a really cool racetrack, Austin, Texas. But I went to New Orleans last year for the Super Tour for the first time. My first time ever in New Orleans, other than just a quick drive-through. And we spent, my wife came down. My wife doesn't do the racing thing, but when I told her we were going to New Orleans, she was like, I'll go with you to that race. We spent a couple of days after the race and just toured New Orleans, and we went to Jazz Club every night and ate some awesome food. And I absolutely fell in love with the city of New Orleans. And I decided at that moment that if I ever hit the lotto, I would rent a flat right above or across the street from Cafe Du Monde, and in that flat would be a bed, a piano, and a bar, and that would and maybe a microwave. And once a month, I'd go spend a weekend in New Orleans because I've absolutely fallen in love with that city. So, welcome to the show. Thank you. Congratulations on your 2024 Formula Vee National Champion. Now, two Whitstons with national championships in the family. We're going to talk about all of that in a moment. But we start every show, whenever we have a new first-time guest, with the same question. You watch the show, so you know what's coming, so you've had a chance to formulate the answer. How did you get mixed up with this crazy sport that we love?
Yeah, that's an interesting question for me because it kind of has different chapters in it with me playing different parts. So, me and my brothers and my family and my sister, we were all basically born at the racetrack from a very, very young age. We grew up in Neenah, Wisconsin, which is about 45 minutes to an hour from Road America. And so as a young child, 1 year old, even less than 1 year old, I have pictures of me with, ear protection, sitting in corner 5, watching race cars. So that's kind of the first chapter is just all of us watching our dad drive race cars throughout our entire life. Really became involved in my teenage years. My brothers are a little bit older than me. So after they moved out of the house, it was just kind of me and my dad. And we would go to the track and I would do radios and times. And it was just kind of the two of us for many years, kind of just going around, did a lot of Blackhawk, Grattan, Brainerd, Gingerman, Road America, obviously. And then obviously we started going to the runoffs at Mid-Ohio and kind of just became a family tradition. Every year I'd be able to take a week off of school. And there's nothing better as a kid to get out of school for a week and go hang out at the racetrack. Yeah. And so that's kind of how it all started. And I never really thought that I would be in a position to be able to drive a race car.
Yeah.
For a couple different reasons. Financially, it's very expensive.
Sure.
And also my size, I'm 6'3". And it kind of came to a situation during COVID where I was always a weightlifter. So I think I was probably about 290 pounds at that point. And COVID hit and my gym closed. And I was no longer able to lift weights. And I went online. I tried to order a bunch of weights for my garage and everything was sold out.
And expensive if you could get it.
Yeah, it was insane. There was just no reason to do it. And so in talking with Zach and Andy, I call Andrew is I call him Andy. Everyone else calls him Andrew in the racing world. So if I say Andy, that's what I'm talking
That's
about.
fine. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, essentially it went from shopping for weights and bench presses and that kind of stuff. And I said, well, why don't I just buy an iRacing rig, and then we
Yeah.
can all race together. And so I bought an iRacing rig, and just a few weeks later, I ended up signing up for the MSR Houston Drivers School. And yeah, and basically, the joke in our family is that if you're on your way to the racetrack to do any track days or anything like that, just turn around. Don't go. Don't do it to yourself. Just turn around. Don't go. And I showed up, and here I am.
Yeah. I chuckled when you went through your story because our stories, while the generation's slightly different, are so parallel. I grew up basically smack dab between Road America and Blackhawk Farms down by Lake Geneva.
Yep.
And my dad raced back in the 60s, and then I was bored, and he stopped racing for a number of years, got back into a car when I was 16. My best friend's dad was also kind of a gearhead, and he took us to Road America for the IMSA races. And that is when I, as I've said on the show several times, discovered both fast cars and bikinis. And I thought, well, this racing thing's pretty cool, and just absolutely fell in love with it. So my father is the problem. I mean, is the reason as well why I'm doing this now, 40 plus years later. So our stories are very, very similar, right down to the fact that you didn't think you could go racing because of the size. I have a semi-similar problem. I am the perfect stature to be a Formula One race car driver, 5'6". Nothing wrong with that. The problem is I'm also in the 300-pound range, and 5'6", 300 pounds is snug in just about every kind of race car and impossible in others. So I'm also kind of an iRacing guy who's trying to lose some weight to get back into a race car. So I get it. So you didn't start racing till during COVID?
Yeah, 2020.
So you started racing in 2020. And you're the 2024 Formula Vee national champion. That's a heck of a short-term learning curve.
Yeah, no, I'm like I said, and I didn't think it was going to happen that quickly. Yeah, it was pretty exciting. I have kind of a funny story. So every race I've ever done has been, against Andrew and Zach.
Right.
They're amazing race car drivers, right? So I've only won 2 races in my life, and those are the June sprints and the runoffs.
That's 2 good ones to win.
Yeah, if you're going to pick them, right? That's the ones to do.
So I was looking last year at the Super Tour standings. Contrary to popular belief, I do a tiny bit of research for these shows. And you came in second to Andy. Do I get to call him Andy too? Because that's awesome. You came in second to Andy. The only race you won last year in the Super Tour runoffs realm, I don't know if you did any regional or divisional stuff. The only race you won last year was the one you really want to win, right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. Andy is so frustrating to race against. I mean, I don't know exactly what the statistics are. We could go back and look, but I would guess out of the last 30 races he's entered, he's probably won 25 of them.
Wow.
He's had 2 seasons, I think, where he's won 11 out of 11 races. It's just, if you're going to beat someone, he's the one to beat. And, Road America with the draft really helps as well.
Right.
It makes him a little bit more beatable, but at other racetracks, it's very tough to beat him.
Yeah. So you're a national champion. You've got Andy in the family, and is he the one who's got the 3 national championships?
Yes.
Okay. So you are in a family that knows how to race a Formula Vee fast. You've watched your brother probably finish behind him and followed him a lot. What's it take to drive a Formula Vee fast?
You got to have the whole package. It's not a spec car by any means. And so we're all really blessed that we have our father, who builds our own engines, builds our own transmissions, develops the car. I mean, the only reason I could fit in my race car is because he completely modified it. I drive a race car that is a P2, but it's a modified P2. So it's actually about an inch and a half wider at the top for me to be able to get in and out of the car. So we bought the car that way, but all of my foot pedals, the shifter link, everything has been modified, re-welded for me to be able to fit inside that race car. I actually, if you've ever seen me in my car, I have a very, very little tiny steering wheel.
Okay.
Because if the steering wheel is any bigger, it hits my legs and I can't drive the car. So
Okay.
first and foremost, if it wasn't for my dad, none of us would be as fast as we are. Like that's number one. But driving a V is all about momentum. Um, it's really all about apex speed. It's a little less about the lines that you drive. It's just more about making sure that you are at the correct apex speed when you're at the apex. If you're off 2 miles an hour at the apex, it makes a huge difference.
Sure.
But it's just you really have to let the car roll, and the car slides constantly. We have such small amount of contact with our small tires on the pavement that you're sliding and catching the car 2, 3, 4 times in a corner. And so getting really comfortable with that slip angle and the yaw and to be able to get that car to slide because you're actually, turning in a little bit earlier than you normally would because
Right.
you're actually sliding to the apex. And then also just like really getting comfortable with that car rolling. The car likes a lot of no input, so it's a lot of time spent with no brakes, no gas, which is a little bit different than how you would drive a different car. So,
Sure.
I think a lot of just like anything, you learn how to drive a race car, and all of the handwork, all of the footwork kind of computes from one to the other. But it is a little bit different of a driving style than most race cars.
Interesting that your car's modified, because for a long time I have been contemplating doing one of two things: cutting a Formula V literally in half and adding a couple of inches all the way across front to back, or starting from scratch and building my own. I've never welded anything before. That's probably the biggest thing that's kept me from that part of the project. What was the decision making? Is it just because the Protoform is a platform that the family knows really well to modify one of those rather than maybe do something else?
It's a really funny story. So we have an old family friend. His name is Bob Geeson. He ran Formula 500 for years and years and years, and Formula V. And so as a kid, I remember he bought the race car that I own now, and
Okay.
he actually raced that car. And we kind of traveled around with him, always parked with him. He was kind of always the guy that we were at with the track. So it's very ironic that I end up with that race car as an adult.
Hmm.
But no, I bought the car from Elliott Barron, the Barron Racing, and it just so happened to be the wider car. I think he kind of rented the car to me and kind of it suggested that car because it was the wider car. So the width of the frame was built that way. They built
Oh, so Protoform built a wide-bodied car.
correct. I don't know if they built
Oh.
more than one or two of them, but the width of the top of the frame was already wide when I got the car,
Huh.
but I still didn't fit in it. And so there were some
Oh.
modifications that we made again to that. But no, as far as the P2 platform, we're just a protoform family.
Right.
We feel that it's got the best platform as far as speed, as far as setup, and as far as safety.
Okay.
So those are some aspects that we really, really like. And just we all drive the same car. And my dad just has worked on the same car over and over and over and just really knows how to set them up. The
Yeah.
handling of the car is really, really good.
Yeah, that part made sense to me because, parts are keep the same spares across all of them. And, the car, you learn the car, you've got the notebook for the car. So all of that made sense when I looked down the entry list and saw, Whitston, Protoform, Whitston, all of that. So I didn't know the modification needed to get you in the car. Now, the rest of the brothers are not as big as you?
Andy's about my height. He's maybe about an inch shorter than me.
Okay.
But we're all large. I mean, Andy's 6'2", Zach's 6 foot, and I think my dad's 6 foot.
Okay.
Well, it's not like any of us are small.
Right.
But yeah, I have the widest shoulders, and I'm just like overall bigger than they are. So.
Yeah. So we're going to get back to talk a little bit more about Formula V in a minute. You also are racing now in FE2. How is it to get in and out of that car?
Oh, it's easy.
Oh, really?
The car's huge. I think anyone could fit in that race car.
Huh. This is good information for my brain because I hadn't even thought of that as an option at all for someone who's on the larger side.
Yeah, that car has so much room, and there's so much adjustment, up and down, forwards and backwards. The
Uh-huh.
pedals move. You see guys that drive that car that are 5'1", 5'2", and you see guys that drive that car that are 5'6", or 6'5".
Right, right.
I think there's some drivers on both ends of that scale. And then as far as width, I've driven that car probably as high as 285 as far as weight,
Okay.
and I've had lots and lots of room. I've never had any
Nice.
issue.
Interesting. Interesting. Why FE2 as a Formula V driver? What makes that an attractive alternative or next step? Or what was your thought? Did you want a next step in your driving career? Did you just want to try something faster? What was your thought process in stepping up from Formula V?
It's a great question. I don't really have any mechanical ability. I don't work on race cars other than changing tires and doing oil and gas and that kind of stuff. So really finding a class that was heavily supported by a CSR or a prep shop was really important to me. Also, we're very, very good friends, family friends for years and years and years with the Jenner John family. And so that's who Chris and Adam were running with. And at the Runoffs VIR, I don't know, what was that? This one 22, right?
20. Yeah, could have been.
Yeah, because I think 20 was the Road America, 21 was Indy. I just went up to Chris and I said, Chris, who do you run with? I'd really like to. And it was maybe even almost like a pie in the sky dream, like this isn't going to go anywhere.
Right.
And he's like, well, come on, come talk to Surin down at Alliance Autosport, come sit. And I saw and talked to Surin, and Surin goes, get in the car. And I sat in the car and I immediately go, oh my gosh, this car is huge. Like I could so comfortable in this race car. And so the idea that my dad could prep my one race car and travel and bring that car to the track for me, but then also work with a prep shop that could do an arrive and drive situation, because I'm not going to drive a trailer or work on a race car or any of that kind of stuff. So it just made a ton of sense for me versus a platform like a Formula Continental or something like that, which takes a lot of work and setup and a lot of prep. Going to a spec class, I thought made a lot of sense for me.
This kind of ties in interesting to the next part of our conversation. We're going to talk about Formula V and the situation with the club and the numbers and all of that kind of stuff. And when we talk about that and all of the consolidation, I hear lots of different reasons about why there's problems in specific classes or whatever the case may be. And one of the things I hear, and I don't agree with this, by the way, is arrive and drive is killing the SCCA. And I'm like, if we didn't have arrive and drive, how few numbers would we have today? Because there are a bunch of people who are either like you, who don't have a lot of mechanical acumen or don't have the time to do it. Because even if you are the best wrench in the world, if you're working 60 hours a week to be able to afford to go racing, sometimes the last thing you want to do is roll around underneath a race car all weekend long or after work or whatever the case be. And you may not even have the time to do it. I think arrive and drive is one of the most important aspects of what we do today.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. One of the considerations that I've been thinking about is with the Super Tour style of racing, it's almost more of like a pro path. So you have a club that has club racing, and then you have a Super Tour, which basically has races all throughout the country.
Right.
So how difficult is it for an owner-operator, someone who works on their own car, who packs their trailer, who drives to the racetrack, and then drives that race car? How difficult is it to go to a Watkins Glen and to a Portland?
Right.
You go to NOLA and to Road America. Without that arrive and drive, the Super Tour numbers would be so far lower.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the situation that SCCA has right now. And, we're a huge fan of the Super Tour, just because we like to go to destination racetracks. We like to go to new places. We like to travel. It's fun for our family to go and hang out in New Orleans and go down and, spend a few days afterwards and go around and visit all these racetracks. But the average owner operator can't do the Super Tour.
Right.
They just time wise, financially wise, if you work on your own race car and haul your own trailer, It's very difficult to do more than 2 or 3 of these events.
Scotty B. White has kind of a hybrid arrive and drive program. He doesn't, I don't believe they don't work on any other cars except for his. But when he goes around to the Super Tour with his 1 or 2 haulers, depending on who he's got cars, a whole different wide variety of classes. They all stuff them in the hauler. He takes them back and forth to the races. And then the drivers show up. Sometimes they bring their own crew or mechanics with them. So he solves kind of half of that problem for people because he's coming from Washington and going to, Sebring and Road Atlanta and doing almost the entire Super Tour. But there are people who he takes along with him who could never do it without his help for exactly the reason you're talking about. So I think there's lots of ways to solve the puzzle, and arrive and drive is really important for that, for those options for people who don't. And I love the people who love to wrench on cars. I adore wrenching on cars. I actually think I probably prefer wrenching than driving, although I do love driving them as well. But my problem is time. I wish I had more time to do it and space to work on my car right now. I live in California where space is a premium, and my garage is filled with a street car and a bunch of other storage stuff. The only car I could fit in my garage right now would be a Formula Vee or a Formula Ford or a Formula F or a Formula 6. I don't even know I could fit an FE2 car in my garage right now. So there's lots of different considerations for a lot of different people. How have you found the transition from Formula V to FE2? And you go back and forth sometimes on the same race weekend. How hard is that?
That's what I prefer.
Yeah.
That's what's been so difficult for me with Formula V not being put into the Super Tour.
Yeah.
Is that, last year I can't remember exactly what it was, but I think I was like second or third, or maybe third or fourth in all of SCCA as far as race starts.
Right.
Where I was able to do a certain amount of weekends, 12 weekends or something like that, drive both race cars and get all those starts. Being able to jump back and forth, I think is what helped me progress as a driver quickly. Because, no matter what you're driving, you have to drive it,
Yeah.
And so there was a little bit of practice that had to be done as far as, the Formula V does have a clutch and, you're shifting versus the sequential in the FE2. So, one, you're right foot braking, the other one, you're left foot braking. And I've had races that are back to back.
All right.
So you're literally jumping out of the car, running down the grid, jumping into the next car, and you're braking differently. You're using different heat. You're doing different things, and I think that's one of the things that's helped me progress the most. But that's what's been difficult for me because I basically this year, because I only have so many weekends, right?
Sure.
My family's only going to allow me to go to so many weekends. I can't go to 20 race weekends a year. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
And so my race starts are dramatically down this year just because I'm not able to drive both race cars.
Right. Yeah, definitely. All right, we've kind of been tiptoeing around it. Let's stop the tiptoeing. The changes this year across the board in SCCA, probably the most dramatic single season shift in the way road racing operates in the 35, 40 years that I've been involved with the sport. There have been some changes over the years. There's been some classes that have dropped and some classes that have consolidated over time. When I started, there was a GT1, GT2, GT3, GT4, and GT5. Now we're down to GT1, GT2, and with 3 and lights being molded into other classes. But so we've had classes. Sports 2000 was a national class when I started. That's no longer a national class. So the idea that what has happened over this last year is so foreign to the club is kind of a myth, especially if you've been around for a long time. What is foreign is the all of it happening in at one time. That's what has made this such, I think, a dramatic kind of shock to the system for SCCA club members. And as anyone who's watched the show knows, I have been an advocate for shrinking our number of classes for a long time. I believe that we have way too many races on race weekends, and that cuts cuts down on track time. And if you have 12 weekends a year, Steve, or now whatever you're going to do this year, you want to be on that racetrack as much as possible. And you spend a lot of money to get there, and you spend a lot of money on entry fees, and, going out and all of that money and getting, if you're green the entire race on a good race weekend, you probably have an hour and 45 minutes on the racetrack. A 25-minute race, a 35-minute race, a couple of qualifying sessions. If it's an hour and a half, that's a great race weekend. And we all know all races don't go green. All sessions don't go green the entire time. So there are race weekends when you might get less than an hour of race time, and you've spent $600 on an entry fee, however thousands of dollars it takes to get yourself back and forth to the racetrack. If you're renting a car like you do an FE2, I'm guessing an FE2 track weekend is going to be what, $3,000 for a weekend?
No, it's more than that.
It is. Okay. See, I haven't even priced it out. So more than $3,000 for the weekend. I won't put you on the spot.
Yeah.
But it's a shit ton of money.
It's not cheap.
Unless you're independently wealthy, and most of us aren't, it is a ton of money. And I believe track time is king. And that's why I have said for a long time that we have to find a way to get more track time. And I thought that the best way to do that would be to consolidate classes, get more groups. So we get to today. We now have fewer classes. We haven't cut down on run groups, but what I do think is the positive is that with maybe smaller run groups, we'll get more green flag action. I think that is a positive. And if the first couple of races are any indication, that seems to be working out this year. We went mostly green to checker this past weekend at Road Atlanta. There were a couple of sessions that might have been cut short by a few minutes, but not a whole lot of full course yellow action. And Road Atlanta is not one of those hot pickup places. They wait for the whole field to get under the pace car before they run after a car. So I thought it was a really good weekend. One of the classes, well, two of the classes took a huge hit this year in this whole reorganization is Formula F and Formula V. Two classes with, by the rules, enough numbers to stay part of the Super Tour, part of the runoffs. And however you want to phrase it, I know there are some very trigger-filled terminology that some racers have used. But Formula F and Formula V, I'm keeping Formula 6 out of the discussion only because they didn't have enough numbers to go to the runoffs anyway. So they would have been gone regardless of whether or not this reorganization had happened this year. And I love that class too, by the way. Formula F and Formula V only invited to 2 Super Tours this year. And I know that has upset a lot of people, and I completely understand it. What are your thoughts on, first of all, the realignment, and then second of all, how they've handled the small bore open wheel class?
There is a lot to unpack of what you just talked about. Now, first and foremost, I am an open wheel race car guy.
Yep.
So there is kind of this, not battle, but there is kind of two mentalities as far as the SCCA driver, right? There's the open wheel classes and the closed wheel classes. And I kind of consider Spec Racer Ford an open wheel.
Okay.
I guess you could throw it in either sure. camp. But so let's start with Formula V. It kind of goes back to what I was saying before, is that as far as Formula V goes, there's not a ton of arrive and drives.
Right.
There's a lot of owner-operators. There is the Richardson camp, Formula Ingenuity, who does some rentals. But Mark doesn't go to tons and tons of these Super Tours. And then there's Scalar, who also rents cars. And maybe I'm missing another small little prep shop for Formula V, but there are very, very few of them that go to the Super Tours. So again, for Formula V to travel across the country with the distance as owner-operators, a majority of owner-operators, not a ton of arrive and drives, it's very difficult for these people time-wise. I mean, a lot of time, right? I mean, if you're towing your trailer 12,
Yeah.
18, 24 hours to the racetrack, you're not talking about a 3-day weekend. You're talking about a week-long event.
Yep.
And then you go home and work on the car, and then you got 2, 3 weeks to the next race. It's just not feasible,
Right.
unless you're doing it somewhat professionally. Or, even better if you have a prep shop and you run your race car with your prep shop.
Right.
That's we see that a lot amongst a lot of classes, a lot of the people who are actually driving the cars as well as facilitating getting the cars to the racetrack.
Right.
But that doesn't work out well for Formula V for the Super Tour structure.
Right.
So we really do lean towards a regional style of racing where you're going to the racetracks or within 6 hours from your house. And a lot of those, for a lot of people, don't fall into a ton of those Super Tours. So that's the problem with Formula V and the Super Tour path. I think that the overall right, coming from my dad has been driving Formula V's since 1971 or 72, right? He's been driving Formula V's forever, since he was basically like 18 years old. I think the big fear is that when you look at the historical value to these people of what Formula V is, and you look at the list of national champions and the people who have gone on in these cars to go do bigger and better things, there is a real pride. What car group has a better pride in the history than Formula V, right? These drivers it's a cult, right?
Yes.
These people love these things, right? And I think that there was, unfortunately, in my opinion, and this could be wrong, but I feel like there was a lack of communication from SCCA to the Formula V drivers about what's going on. And that led to some conspiracy theories about they're trying to get rid of us. And I think that led to a lot of fear. And I think that if there would have been more of an open door conversation about this is what we're thinking about doing, what do you guys think about this? We're not doing it this year, but next year, why don't you guys get your numbers up? If you get your numbers to here, and we kind of work together on it. But unfortunately, all of us Formula V drivers found out about this off of SCCA.com when we logged in that morning and looked at the article online.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate because we didn't know it was coming. Now, if you look at Formula V, we had the third most cars in the runoffs last year as far as classes, and we had the eighth most participation in SCCA overall the entire season. So the numbers aren't bad, but our numbers in the Super Tours were not fantastic.
Right.
Primarily the ones that are further away from the East Coast or the Central States.
Right.
When you're talking about the southern races, you're talking about Hallett, you're talking about NOLA, you're talking about Buttonwillow. Those races that aren't near where our most of our drivers live. Those were not well attended. So what SCCA did as far as taking the Formula V's out of the Super Tour on paper makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Giving us the bonus weekends and that kind of stuff does make a lot of sense. But again, I think that there was kind of this overall feeling that SCCA is trying to get rid of us, and it kind of turned into some fear.
Yeah.
And you kind of saw some of the V drivers kind of maybe react to that, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's interesting because when they went through the whole process about deciding and introducing this idea that we're going to go down to 18 classes and shortening the runoffs and everything, through that entire process, I had thought to myself, wow, this is the most communication that I've ever seen out of the club for anything in the recent past. There was a town hall meeting. Eric Prill did his little thing about what he was thinking about doing. There was surveys where people could give feedback and all of that. So I was like, wow, this is a kind of the club has turned over a new leaf. And then what happened. And I'm like, and I listened to all of them and followed all of everything. And as you said, the decision to change the races that Formula F and Formula V could go to was not in any of that.
No, and it was almost the opposite. It gave us a feeling of safety. When we're in these meetings, they're saying, if you have your car counts, don't worry, it's not you. And I get it. I understand why they made the decisions they did. It had to do with run groups and being able to run with other people. And there was a lot more to it. And frankly, I'm glad that I'm not the one in charge of making those decisions because unfortunately, you're going to make someone angry.
Right.
All these people have money invested into these things. It's just the way it is.
There was no way to do any of this without making anybody angry. Absolutely no way. And sometimes, though, as any organization, whether it's a full-on business or a club/business of what SCCA is, sometimes some tough decisions have to be made, and someone's going to take it on the chin as far as taking responsibility for those decisions, and then the people who are the recipient of the end result of those decisions, they take it on the chin. So, there's no question there. The
If
other
you don't mind, I'm going to switch to the other side. So
Sure.
we've talked about Formula Vee, but one of the things that I think is really important for me to talk about as an FE2 driver is the way that we've handled the big bore classes as far as open wheel cars has been, I think it's been a point of frustration for a lot of the big bore drivers, open wheel big bore.
Sure.
Just because we had all of these incidences at VIR several years ago where they put all the big bore classes together. And I don't know if you remember that race, but there was a race weekend where there was maybe like 3 or 5 green flag laps the entire weekend.
I do.
And SCCA kind of came out and said, listen, we're going to split big bore into 2 groups.
Right.
And so when they did that, I think they kind of gave a lot of the big bore drivers hope that they would be able to have, not 70 cars or 50 cars on track, but make significantly different speed in different places. And I feel like that was going really, really well. And when they eliminated Formula Vee or small bore open wheel cars from some of these platforms, we kind of felt as big bore drivers that we were going to have more single classes, more split classes where we would have 2 groups for big bore. And I don't know if I'm sure you were paying attention at the Sebring race this year, the Sebring Super Tour, absolute disaster.
Yeah.
Again, just absolutely no green flag laps. I think the race on Saturday, we had several laps. The race on Sunday, I think we had 2 laps.
Right.
And again, it's just another point of frustration for some of our FE2 drivers, because once you give somebody something and then take it back away, I think that makes it more difficult.
Yeah.
And I think throughout all this, getting rid of the small bore open wheel, big bore felt like they were going to have track time and be able to make that happen. And that hasn't happened. We've gone down to 1 open wheel class. And, we're seeing this after Sebring. We have 2 of the front runners in FE2 have sold their race cars.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are moving away from that open big bore open class because we're just not getting the laps.
Right.
And again, I don't have any of the answers. Like I said, I'm really glad that I'm not in charge of that. But I think it's important for me to say that because that is happening. It's real.
So let me ask some questions then, because I had not thought about that dynamic until you just brought it up. When they did start splitting them up because of what happened, or at least maybe partially because of what happened at VIR several years ago, I suspect there were a lot more Formula Atlantics and Formula Continentals showing up at that time.
Sure.
It seems to me that these days, 2 or 3 Formula Atlantics, 1 or 2 Formula Continentals, maybe some FX cars. But if you look at the numbers, just raw numbers, I haven't seen a bigger field in open wheel big bore than maybe 25 or 30 cars.
Well, we had, I think we had 70 cars in big bore at June sprints last year, all in 1 class. Sebring had significant numbers. I don't know exactly what they were, but I think we had 12 or 14 FE2s. Right. I think there were probably 12 or 15, maybe 10 Atlantics. But we had, 30, 40 cars. And then you saw SCCA as a whole trying to do 2 classes for Road Atlanta. Right. And the car currents weren't there because the frustration was already there.
So I guess I have 2 questions. First of all, how much of that, and I had this discussion with Michael Lewis, I think is who we're talking about. How much of this is on the drivers to figure out a way to make it work? I'm as you know, I don't shy away from asking tough questions. Sure. So how much of this is all of the drivers in those classes at Sebring and at Road America knew there's a bunch of cars and we have to find a way to play together. How much of it is on the drivers to take that all into consideration in the way they drive their race cars?
I don't know if I can answer that question.
Okay,
Um,
that's fair.
I'm not sure how to answer that question. Part of the problem with Sebring is we had several fires in
Right.
some of the prototype cars, right? And so by the time we lined everyone up, everyone went into the pits. Then they had to re-grid everybody.
Yeah.
The amount of cars that were in the grid had to be re-grid. Obviously, the Formula Atlantics, they need to have batteries to restart. All the
Sure.
cars started dying because they sat overheating for 15 minutes. Everyone had to turn their cars off. There was just too many cars to reshuffle the grid in the pit lane.
Yeah.
So is it an issue with the car starting on fire? Absolutely,
Yeah.
of course. But it was also a problem of those big cars don't like to sit.
Yeah.
They overheat very quickly. They run out of battery. They have a lot of systems on them. So I don't think there's one thing to point to, but I just think that that's important to mention because when you have some of the top runners in FE2, guys who have won the runoffs,
Yeah.
selling their race cars and saying, I'm never doing this again, I think that's something to consider.
Is there another? There's really no other place other than splitting them up into two groups. There's not another group anymore that any of those cars could go into.
No, and
that's hard.
Now you're at a point where a lot of these super tours we have 6 closed wheel classes. Well, I guess we count Spec Racer 4, but you have between Formula Vee, Formula Ford, Continental, FX, Atlantic, P1 or P2, FE2. You have one run group for all of those.
Yeah.
And so, again, in Road Atlanta, I do give it to SCCA. They did try to split it up into 2 groups, but again, the participation was so low, they put it back to 1, which I don't blame them. I would have too. And as you said, the race ran great, because the car counts weren't that high. So what's the formula for that? I don't know. But, when you talk about the difference between a Formula Ford and a P1,
right,
the speed, the cornering, everything's so different. They just can't run together. It's just not safe.
No, I understand, and I agree with that. The club is got an awesome problem, and that's that we've got too many cars. and when you try to smash all these cars together on a race weekend and give them all adequate race time, there's as you said, it's hard decisions that need to be made. Now, the one thing I think that the club's done this year more so than years past is they've been, at least with the Super Tours, they've been willing to rework the run groups when they see that there's a smaller class or a couple smaller classes, maybe move this class into this group or this class into that group. But that doesn't help the one big bore formula group because, unless they're going to separate out into another group altogether, there's no good solution there. And I don't know the answer to that question either. It's just tough. It really is, and the other option, it's just way too much money, is maybe we split these up over 2 race weekends, and give everybody a whole lot more track time. And I don't know if the drivers, there's 2 considerations with that. The drivers would have to be willing to pay more money because there'll be less cars per weekend. And then where do we get we have a hard enough time with volunteers on the race weekends that we do. If you double the race weekends, what are we going to do with volunteers and having enough people to staff the corners and all the other stuff? It's just a hard nut to crack, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, this is the 3rd time I'll say it. I'm glad I'm not the one in charge of making these decisions.
Yeah.
I think what they've done with small bore formula cars, as far as putting the bonus major weekends in there and having us qualify for the runoffs through that, I think is a path that makes the most amount of sense. I think that was really, really smart that SCCA did that. I know as far as the Formula Vee community, I'm probably one of the only ones that feel that way. So I really do support SCCA that way. Again, I think what happened was the communication kind of led to some unease as far as what the future looked like for Formula.
An idea that I had, and I don't need you to respond to this, I just like throwing these out sometimes so that people hear it and then maybe it starts a discussion. What if we did 10 super tours with Spec Miata, Spec MX-5, Spec Racer Ford, and then have 2 or 3 other race groups every weekend, rotate them through all the other classes, and then do exactly what they're doing with Formula F and Formula V, where they create bonus majors around the country for everyone else to get the rest of their races. Because frankly, when you look at the rundown at any race, and Spec MX5's getting there now. They're bringing 2025 cars every weekend. You've got Spec MX5, Spec Miata, and Spec Racer Ford are probably 60% of our numbers, maybe 50% for a race weekend, especially when you're double dipping. Now, the problem comes is that a lot of those cars double dip sometimes, and that takes numbers away as well, but that would bring more cars maybe to these bonus majors as well. Could that be a solution? Don't need to answer. I'm throwing it out there. If you want to answer, fine. But I'm just throwing it out there as maybe we need to just take another step of relooking how we do things. And that would give more track time and, kind of be that way. Don't answer.
I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah.
I think something like that could work. I think it's really, really important for SCCA. This is my one message that I'll send.
Yeah.
It's really, really important when they're doing surveys and when they're doing these Zoom calls and they're asking people's opinions that they're talking to the people that are participating.
Right.
I think it should be limited to either the people who are running a Super Tour the year before or someone who was a runoffs participant.
Right.
It seemed like in some of those town hall meetings that there were some people who hadn't run runoffs or Super Tours in a long time.
Yeah.
And those are the people who a lot of times will complain about costs and those kind of things.
Right.
And my fear is those people will complain about costs, we make it cheaper and more affordable, and then they still don't come.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's really important to lean on the people who are recent participants.
Yep.
Because those are the people who are actively there and actively should have an opinion.
Sure.
But man, I don't have an answer. I really don't.
No, I just hear a lot of people saying that the Super Tour has killed the divisional and regional programs. And maybe that in some areas that may be the case. The idea of having, the Super Tour pared down even a little bit more might help those divisional and regional races attract bigger numbers because people are going to have to go to those races to get their runoffs qualification in. I'm just throwing it out there as an option because I think that if you don't think bigger, then the small changes don't make as much of a difference. And I like throwing ideas out there and see what pops and sticks against the wall. So that's one of those moments. I appreciate that you don't want to answer, and that's cool. I'm good with that. But maybe it starts a discussion and what other ways can we change things to make them better, not just change for the sake of change, which I don't like either. So, all right. The other reason I have you here is to talk about NOLA. That's coming up here. This will be airing the Tuesday before the race. We're recording ahead of time, and NOLA was on the Super Tour last year. I believe it was originally maybe, and it's been back on now that we're not doing COTA. And I know people would love to go to COTA, but COTA has become just dastardly expensive. I don't know many organizations at the grassroots level who are still spending money to go to COTA. But I'm guessing before we get to NOLA, you're sad COTA is no longer on the Super Tour?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's so well attended. I mean, speaking which, the last Super Tour that we had at COTA, we had, I think, 27 or 28 Formula Atlantics.
Yeah.
Just the car count was awesome. It's also 30 minutes from my house.
Sure.
Which is good and bad. Sometimes when you go to the racetrack, you like to be a little bit more separated. It's fun to travel to the racetrack and not feel like you have to drive home. And, it kind of cuts into hanging out at the racetrack. But no, it's heartbreaking that we can't go to COTA anymore. I know so many drivers that want to go there. And I've also talked to many, many people about the costs. And I understand, I've heard the stories about what they wanted. It's really a shame that those guys can't come to terms on that.
Yeah. I would like to see maybe kind of like the runoffs where we rotate from year to year. That maybe once every 2 or 3 years we, don't go to NOLA and hit COTA. Understand it's going to be a big expense. And I think that would actually make the huge car numbers if you realize that, this is my one chance every 3 years to go do a Super Tour COTA. That might make up for the extra cost to go there. Again, thinking out of the box, throwing things out there. If we could consider things like that, I think that would be pretty awesome to do that.
How amazing would it be to do the runoffs at Coda? It'd be fantastic.
Yeah, and I've never been there, so I don't know if I would guess that they have a big enough facility to handle what needs to be done for that. But if it's expensive to rent Coda for 3 days, I can only imagine what it would be to rent it for 11 days or 7 days or whatever it is.
Yeah, well, I think with the new format of the runoffs, it's considerably shorter now.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
2 qualifying and 2 racing days, and then maybe a couple test days. So, but yeah, I'm not sure what the costs are, but it would be cool.
Yeah, it would be. It would be, because I've never been there. So that was the one thing when they took it off the schedule when I started doing the Super Tours. I was like, oh, that sucks. But I will get there for something, probably F1 at some point in time, because I know some guy who lives 30 minutes away where I can stay if I come for F1 and not spend the $40 million on hotels in Austin.
Come on.
So anyway, New Orleans, NOLA. Last year was our first year back in a while. My first time at that racetrack. First off, what do you think of the racing at NOLA? How does it work in Formula in FE2?
I was a little concerned. Last year was my first time at that track. I was a little concerned because I've just been told over and over and over how flat it is. And it is. There's virtually zero elevation in the entire place. I was really concerned with that, but the track is so fast.
Yeah.
There's so many fast corners that is just a blast to drive. There are multiple corners on the track that are almost flat. So it's like you're lifting just a little bit, and as the tires come in, you're kind of changing that. It's the S's are almost flat in most cars, but not. It depends on conditions and how cold the tires are and that kind of stuff. So the track itself I loved it. It was a great racetrack. It was like I said, it's just very, very fast, and that's kind of suited to more of my racetrack. I'm a better racer when it comes to courage versus talent. I really like Watkins Glen. I really like those really, really fast sweeping corners. That kind of suits my driving style a little better than like the Mid Ohio's,
right?
Where it's more technical. So the track for me I love it. It's great.
Cool. What's the key to going fast at NOLA? Is it needing to have maybe a little more courage than common sense?
Yeah, I think so. Last year we had so much rain.
Yeah.
That made it really, really interesting. I think we ran maybe about half of the sessions in the rain.
Right.
Luckily for the races, it dried up a little bit, but for some of the qualifying and some of the test days, I love driving race cars in the rain. That's my absolute favorite.
Yeah.
It's the great equalizer.
Yep.
But yeah, I think when you go out there at NOLA, like I said, it's really all about feeling the current grip level, where your tires are at, just how the current car feels. Because like I said, with so many corners that are almost flat out, the conditions change from lap to lap, and especially in the V. Right, you start getting some oil down on the track. Just reading track conditions is really important, and you really have to adapt on that track to the current conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. The thought of getting up car count numbers at some of our races, low car counts at NOLA kind of surprises me, only because New Orleans is kind of like a destination. And there's so much to do. I think we need to market some of our Super Tours as this is not a place to go for a race weekend. Take the family for a week, do a whole thing around it, and realize that there's so much more than just the Super Tour at a race like NOLA. I think that it's just a great week vacation, and then, oh wow, there's a race in the middle of our vacation.
Yeah, I agree. That's what we do. And like I said, we're very, very lucky with my dad prepping all of our cars and traveling, that he's willing to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Where my parents are willing to come down. And, last year we parked the trailers, and NOLA was gracious enough to let us leave the trailers there, I think, for several days at the racetrack. Didn't charge us anything.
Right.
So, hey, we're going to go hang out downtown. Do you guys mind if we leave our RV and our trailers and all of our stuff here? And they said, yeah, no problem. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Which is pretty rare for a racetrack, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just absolutely fantastic. I just think that, again, location wise is so difficult with SCCA right now because it feels like some of the regions have so much of the car counts.
Right.
You know, there are definitely some regions that are very populated as far as where the race car drivers come from,
Right.
and especially with, you know, what, 2 weekends ago or last weekend we had Road Atlanta, and just the schedules, the way they go, especially for those East Coast guys, which, let's be frank, that's where a lot of the drivers are
Sure.
coming from. It's tough to drive from Road Atlanta back home and then pack up next week or the weekend after and then drive to NOLA and then back. I think it's just tough.
Yeah, I think that would it help if you could get NOLA to do kind of what you did, is where could I just drive from Road Atlanta to NOLA, drop my trailer, go home, and then fly back 2 weeks later, and that's in some cases would be less expensive than making that trip both ways. You know, plane tickets $500. I could probably drop $500 in gas with a hauler without any question. You know,
That's interesting. If you look at the car count for Homestead, with
yeah,
them doing the back-to-back weekends with Sebring, Homestead has to be one of the most highest car counts of all the majors, I would think. I mean, there
it
was a lot
is.
of cars.
Yeah. And that's because people are doing kind of what I said. It's
Yeah.
winter. You know, you grew up in Neenah. Where do you want to be in January? Homestead and Sebring sounds pretty awesome, you know, to get away for 2 weeks to make that happen. And I know that is a big deal. And both of those races are better attended when they're back-to-back weekends. Then even if you put one weekend between the two of them, it's a lot of an ass to take, you know, 3 weeks off basically to do that. Whereas when you do them back to back, you're taking maybe 10 days off to do it as a family, or even not as a family. But that's why those two races are as successful as they are, because they're in January where people up north want to go. And, you know, neither of them is like the best destination in Florida, but you can do Homestead, go spend 3 or 4 days in Orlando and do all Disney with the kids, and then come to Sebring, and you get the best of everything for folks. And if you're a beach person, you can go just spend you spend 3 or 4 days on South Beach and enjoy all the food and fun that Miami brings. It works out really, really well. So
I agree.
all right, last bit. I'm gonna poke on the sibling family dynamic for a moment. We've got brothers and sisters that race. We've got fathers and sons that race. We don't have very many 4-participant families out there racing today. What's the sibling family dynamic at the racetrack? Is it fun? Is it competitive? Is it, I don't want my brother to win? What's the deal?
That's a loaded question. As any race car driver will tell you, you always have a plan in mind. You always think something's going to happen. You always have, you know, an idea of where everything's going to go. And there's something about being a race car driver. When you put that helmet on, things change a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that ultimately the four of us like to work with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, you can kind of see where we coordinate some things, especially with how powerful the draft is in Formula Vee.
Right.
To a point, we work with each other. I think when it comes down to the last lap or the second to last lap at the runoffs, I think some of that goes out the window. But yeah, I think it was more important at the runoffs this year for one of us to win than it was to have the opportunity to let somebody else win.
Right.
And I think that showed.
Yeah.
But yeah, the rivalry between the three of us or the four of us it's very strong.
That's awesome.
It's very, very competitive. We like to beat each other.
Of course.
And it's not that it's not friendly, but yeah, I mean, we get heated in the pits, in the paddock, and we get frustrated when the other one beats us. But again, that's what makes it fun. And I can guarantee you that all four of us are better drivers because of that. You know, if we didn't have somebody to chase,
Yep.
you know, if you don't have the level of competition, you just don't get better.
Right.
And I think, we've all been chasing each other for so long and it's been so serious that we desperately want to beat each other that I think it's made us all significantly better drivers.
Yeah. I can't imagine what it would be like to race with three brothers and dad. One of my great disappointments is that I never got to share a racetrack with my dad, and he stopped racing before I started, essentially, or kind of the same time. And I always wanted to be able to put two cars together and drag them back out there, but it never worked out. So the fact that you get to race with your brothers is cool. The fact that you get to race with your brothers and dad, that's awesome, and that's pretty darn cool. Last question before I let you go. Since you kind of came to this game late, 4 years from start to a national championship, you mentioned you did get an iRacing rig, right?
Yep. I've been iRacing on and off. Andrew always had an iRacing rig. So, depending on when we were living close to each other, or we were close, I would always run on his rig. So, I probably first ran iRacing maybe when I was 12, and then I did a bunch when I was like 18,
right.
And then, throughout the years, I had some time in iRacing.
How important or helpful was that to you when you started to go racing, and how much have you used it in the last 4 or 5 years as another way to get some sort of seat time or maybe learn racetracks? How important has that been for you?
I think that iRacing helps specifically with your hand coordination for me. As far as letting a car slide and catching it and getting that feel of that car. I think that the most important thing that iRacing has done for me is to be able to help learn new tracks.
Mm-hmm.
Just 2 weeks ago, I ran with WRL and I ran Barber. I've never driven Barber before. And so me and Zach jumped on iRacing several nights and we're running Barber. And that really helps as far as sighting.
Yeah.
I think it helps with an advantage for, I would say, about 2 sessions. If I went to a new track and have never seen it on iRacing, I think it would take me about 2 sessions to catch up. And with how valuable track time is and how expensive track time is, if you can move ahead a couple sessions, I think that helps significantly.
Right.
But I think if you are looking to drive a specific car to drive your specific real life car on iRacing, and you're looking at brake markers and you're looking at more in-depth data, I don't think it's not 1-to-1, unfortunately.
Okay. How close is the Formula Vee, as a guy who's got a lot of time in a Formula Vee, how close is the Formula Vee? Because it's the iRacing Formula Vee is based off like the Australian Formula Vee car, so it's slightly different. How close is it to what we drive here?
Unfortunately, that is a point of contention for all of us,
Yeah.
is that the Formula Vee is considerably different in real life as it is on iRacing. For a couple different reasons. It's underpowered. As well as it runs the radial tires.
Right.
So the tires are very, very big, which is part of our issue with Formula Vee. I know a lot of people want to go to the radial tire in Formula Vee. It's my opinion, and I believe it's my family's opinion, that the radial tires that they're running on the Formula Vee in real life are too big. Not because of cornering speeds or because anything else, but it does create such a large draft that the draft is no longer good. It's not just good for a second or a second and a half a lap. It's good for several seconds a lap. So it's almost impossible to break away. So if you could see, I know I'm going off on a tangent
here, fine.
But it's important for me to talk about because, again, a lot of people disagree with me on this. And again, I'm probably very different than a lot of the Formula V community. I know it saves costs and there's a lot of advantages to having that car, that tire. But if you look at what happened at the Runoffs last year, where we had a 10-car pack at the Runoffs because of the draft at Road America, I think that if we introduced that radial tire at Road America, that pack easily could have been 20 cars.
So as an announcer, I'm like, yes.
The problem is if you have a car or a driver that is not as competitive, who is in as serious of a race as the Runoffs,
I got you.
And they're now, oh my gosh, I'm in the lead pack at the Runoffs. What are they willing to do to get to the front of that pack?
Yeah, that's a good point.
If you're running several seconds a lap slower than the pack that you're running with, the things that you have to do to be able to stay with that pack, I think, will induce some accidents.
Sure.
So that's my fear.
Yeah.
I think if you go to a track like Mid-Ohio, I think the draft is significantly less, and I think it creates less of a problem. But at tracks like Road America, Watkins Glen, Indy, Daytona, any of those tracks that have long straightaways, I think that it could turn into trouble. That's my opinion.
Sure.
And again, a lot of people don't agree with that. But here's an example for iRacing with the Formula V. If you go to Watkins Glen and the Formula V on iRacing,
Right.
the bus stop is 100% flat out.
Okay.
If you do it in real life, you're hitting the brakes at the 2 mark.
Okay.
So the V in real life is considerably different than the V on iRacing, and it's because it's slightly underpowered and the tires are too big.
Yeah. Lots more grip. So
compared to what we do with SCCA.
Sure. Awesome. Steve, thank you for taking the time. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I enjoy your honesty. I get that from most everybody, but sometimes I feel like people are holding back just a little bit, and I didn't get that here. I appreciate that a lot. So this is the time in the show where you get to thank the people that help you go racing. The floor is yours.
Well, first and foremost, I want to just reiterate, I am and we are SCCA people. We've been SCCA people forever. We'll always be SCCA people. We love SCCA and what it does. We haven't really considered running any other organizations. It's really been in our blood for a really long time, and we are grateful for the organization. I just want to reiterate that it's our home, right? And without it, we don't know what we would do. It's the passion in our life. It's what we talk about at the dinner table. It's what we talk to each other Friday night on the phone until midnight. Racing is our passion, and that is through SCCA. So next, obviously, I have to thank my dad for putting together the amazing cars that he puts together. With all of his prep, he's pretty much full-time in the garage prepping our 4 race cars. That's all he does at this point. And he's been getting better and better and better and better for years and years and years. And the reliability and the performance that we have is unmatched, and we would not be where we are without him. Like, no question. It's not even close. I really want to thank Alliance Autosport, Surin and Jeff from Team Pelfrey and Alliance Autosport for their driver coaching and them prepping my FE2 and just the support and the willing to be competitive and push. And, that's what makes racing fun, is when you work to get better and better and better. And I think, having a prep shop that wants you to win and is pushing you and is willing to look at data and willing to do anything to get you there, has been really, really fun. And I want to thank those guys for all their support. Obviously, my family, my wife and my kids, my mom and everyone else is with us. We wouldn't be able to do it without their support. And I know it's probably frustrating us driving across the country and being away from home for so long. Just their support is what makes it all possible. So.
Very cool. Very cool. This was such a good conversation. I forgot to stop and thank all my sponsors. So hang with me for a second while I do that, and then we're going to chat afterwards for a minute too. But before I go, I've got to thank the people behind me, raceschool.com. They are the presenting sponsor of Inside the SCCA. They're one of the top schools in California. They have a really cool way of how they teach, a lot of one-on-one stuff. They actually start the teaching before you get to the school. You can get your SCCA full comp license there if, of course, you pass the school. They also do defensive driving, high-performance driving days. I'm a firm believer that if you got a kid who's about to start driving, take them to a defensive driving class at an actual driving school. Awesome stuff you can learn there, and it'll keep your kids safer. That is my firm belief. Check out raceschool.com. Also, Solo Performance Specialties, Dave and his crew there. They are the ones who I go to when I need stuff for my solo program, which admittedly is not the best in the world, but we have fun nonetheless. Check those guys out. They have a great online presence, as well as they are at most of the solo national tour events. Ray Esports is the official sim racing league of Inside the SCCA. Love what Stevie Ray does with that stuff. You can check him out as well. And then finally, Dave Pinterick, who is one of our racers, GT1 racer, Spec MX5 driver. His company is William R. Pinterick and Associates. If you need financial planning help, he is the guy to go to. Great guy, SCCA racer. Give him a shout out as well. So, all right, Steve, thanks a bunch. I appreciate it, and we will catch you at the racetrack at NOLA.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, that's going to do it for our episode of Inside the SCCA presented by RaceSchool.com. If you like what you hear, subscribe to the Racing Wire Network and also subscribe to the Racing Network on YouTube so you won't miss any episodes. It would also be great if you follow us on social media so you can find out who our next guests are. Leave a comment, especially if it's a good one. If it's a bad one, put it on someone else's page. On Twitter, you can find me at Race Announcer. There's a new Inside the SCCA every week. I am Brian Bielanski. Have yourself a fantastic weekend. Stay safe and go play with cars.